Hey, all right. I think that's good now. Had a bit of a interesting setup this morning, which caused some issues. Hopefully everyone can hear just fine. Just let me know in the chat if there's any issue with sound, but looking at my monitor, it seems to be okay. Yeah, this morning I was doing a meeting where the platform in question, I think, was Skype for Business, and it only works in Windows, which is rather annoying. And so what I had to do is actually pass through both my webcam and my microphone, so this thing here, um, over to a Windows VM. So that caused it to disappear from my host system and then show up in the Windows VM, which worked fine. But I kind of forgot about this whole thing. So bringing everything back to Linux and then starting the stream just now, I noticed that the microphone was not being picked up at all. Anyway, that seems all good now. I'm gonna be going through some of the early questions that were submitted and then can start everything there. Maybe just before that, a quick update on where we stand with Incus. So Incus 06 is due out for release on Thursday. So that's happening pretty darn soon. If we look at the issues, I did a bunch of bug fixing over the weekend, so things are looking pretty good. Just got 6 things open at this point. Some of those are just going to be moved over to the next milestone. Like, I don't think I'm going to have time to do the MinIO MC client thing, and the oven work has made good progress. I'm going to have a big pull request open over the next few days, but it's not going to be complete. So it's still going to keep kicking that can kind of down the road. It's fine, like it's just an optimization thing, so that should be all right. There are a couple of issues, bugs, things that are being worked on. So the ability to copy an instance, even if it's not of the correct architecture, that's being worked on by Piotr. So maybe we'll have this in time for the 06 release. That'd be cool. And I'm going to be looking at the some refresh copy issues that are going on. The clustered LVM storage driver, I could actually do a quick demo of that later if people want that. It's mostly working. So I've got it going on my laptop on a few VMs. And that works pretty well. The main issue right now is live migration of virtual machines doesn't work because of the way LVM handles the locking. So just need to patch that up and then send the thing up for review. So that's most of that. The GPU not released thing, I've not actually looked at it yet, so I don't know if that's going to be something that I can sort out for 06. But that's how things look like as far as releasing this week. And we're also getting pretty darn close to March and the LTS. So again, the current plan for an LTS release of Incus is going to be towards the end of March. And I'm starting to think really the end of March, if not really early April. So I'll probably still do another normal Incus 0 point release, so like 0.7 most likely, kind of in between now and the LTS. And then try to minimize the amount of changes between that release and the LTS to just make the LTS more stable when it actually does come out. So that's kind of the plan. Other than that, like adoption of Incus has been kind of crazy lately, especially since FOSDEM. We crossed the 10,000 active users number pretty recently, and currently we're looking at a 100% month-to-month growth. So we're effectively doubling the entire user base every month, which is rather insane. Been looking at, we get those numbers from the image server effectively. So if you're actively using Incus and pulling images from the image server, then we get those numbers. So that means it's probably an undercount, as some people will just not launch new instances. Some people are running behind firewalls. Some people don't even use our images at all. But it's quite exciting to see kind of those numbers going up very quickly. It's great. All right, so I'm gonna answer a few questions in the chat. I also got at least one of them through Mattermost, so I'll pick that up as well. First question was, how was FOSDEM? Well, FOSDEM, for anyone who's never been, it's quite an event. It's probably the largest open source conference / event in the world. It mostly attracts massive open source communities from Europe, but it's got probably in the neighborhood, like they don't actually count people these days. There's no registration, no none of that. But a conservative guesstimate would be around 10,000 people present there, which is completely crazy. These days, myself and a group of my friends, we run two of the events at FOSDEM. So on Saturday, we were running the containers dev room, which was in effectively the largest room they had. So I think we had a capacity of like 550-ish people in the room, and we pretty commonly had another 100 or so waiting outside. So that was for the containers dev room. And then on the Sunday, we were doing the kernel dev room, so talking mostly around Linux kernel features. And that was a smaller room. I think we just had a capacity of like 300 or so, but it was also pretty busy. So it was really good. I really enjoyed talking to the different speakers, just getting to catch up with people a bit here and there. But it was also a completely crazy weekend because like I was effectively introducing or running around with microphones or solving some issues kind of all day long for those 2 days. At the same time, I was trying to juggle actually meeting with some of our users, some of our friends there. So it also meant that I was busy every evening, just like hanging out with people I didn't get to see in a while. But it was really good. Yeah, great event. Definitely one of my go-to events every year. Like obviously these days being self-employed, I don't get to go to as many conferences as when my employer was paying for any kind of travel accommodation for any event I can present at. So it's a bit different, but these days out of pocket, I'm quite happy to pay for going to FOSDEM and to go to Linux Plumbers, which is kind of the other event. And that means FOSDEM is usually in February and Linux Plumbers is more in like September to November kind of time frame. So that's my two go-to events this year, like these days. There's a question around like whether I'm a Debian maintainer or Debian developer. I'm neither of those. So I'm an Ubuntu member, Ubuntu core developer. So I did work extensively on Ubuntu even before I joined Canonical. And so I've got pretty much like all the abilities to like do packaging, upload things, update things, whatever in Ubuntu. On the Debian side, I was a Debian user prior to working on Ubuntu. So like in what would that would have been like 2002, 2003-ish, because I started using Ubuntu in 2004. So it was a long time ago. And ever since I left Canonical, I started using Debian more and more. So my desktop and laptop are both on Debian now. And I will probably start contributing more to Debian than I ever did. Not necessarily looking at being a maintainer or developer at this stage, because that's a time commitment I can't really do. But Debian has really improved their collaborative maintenance of packages effectively, mostly through them using a GitLab instance called Salsa, which makes it very easy for anyone to send merge requests to that and send fixes and improve things, even without having to go through the formal process of becoming a maintainer or developer on the Debian project. So that's kind of where I stand there. I'm looking at sending a few fixes to the LXC packaging over to the through Salsa to Debian, and potentially do some of that with the Incus package as well. But to be fair, like Matthias, Free, and the others have been doing a great job at those packages, and there's really not that much for me to do there. There's a question around how the business is going. Business is going pretty well. There was a big spike in work towards the end of last year. Then things kind of got quiet towards the beginning of January and actually up until maybe a week or two ago. And now things are really picking back up. So it's pretty interesting. I also expect that a lot is going to happen as the LTS comes out and people have something that's really production ready that they can use. Again, it's a bit of a reminder, like Incus is at 0 point something. That's mostly because we're waiting to get to our usual LTS timeframe to go straight to 6.0 LTS and line that up with LXC and XCFS. Incus 0 point something is still a very stable piece of software. It's as stable as a 5 point something on the LXD side. But it's also doesn't have that kind of long-term support. Effectively, it's just supported until the next one comes out, and you need to update every month at this point. Whereas once the LTS is out, then you effectively only need to catch up with the bug fix updates, and feature-wise, you get like a big update every 2 years. So that's kind of the difference there. Just taking a question from Mattermost here quickly, if I can find it. Oh, yeah, there we go. So the question was like, whether there is any plan on developing a tool that is similar to Canonical's microcloud, microchef, microoven, and kind of aid with setting up cluster on shared storage and advanced networking. So yeah, there are some plans there for sure. The more immediate one is I actually have a GitHub repo that I created last week, which is not widely known yet because it's not been moved to the main organization yet. So it's Incus deploy, and the intent of that is to have Ansible playbooks, Terraform config, all that kind of stuff to both deploy and operate Incus clusters. So that means deploying not only Incus itself, but also Ceph and Oven and tying everything together. I effectively have that already for my own infrastructure. Like I run 4 or 5 production clusters ranging from like 3 to 10, 20-ish systems. And I've deployed all of those through primarily Ansible. So I've got some of that, but my internal Ansible playbook is very me specific. It's got a lot of assumptions around how I do networking, how my machines work, or how my network works, all of that kind of stuff. So that's the idea. The idea is to pull that logic from my own stuff and from other people's stuff, move that into a kind of first-party set of Ansible playbook, Terraform configs, other scripts, and the like, to really deploy and maintain Incus clusters. So that's the main idea for now. The other thing is, I think longer term, the other thing that's interesting to do is do something that currently in my head I'm calling Incus OS, which is effectively a very small immutable operating system, which would probably be based on Debian or something like that, using the new systemd immutable image plus like fully verified boots with TPM, DM Verity, all that kind of stuff, to get you a very small disk image that only contains the bare minimal that Incus itself needs to run. And then you can install that kind of like the way you would like a Proxmox VE or VMware ESXi or that kind of stuff, where you've got a small image, you put that down onto a small SSD, and you just boot it up, connect to it, do some initial config, and there you go, you get your cluster. The idea of that is also to allow for more reliable updates, I guess. Where it's possible to like flip the entire base image in one shot, or flip just the Incus version and really not having to deal with like all of the packages and packing and config files and all that stuff. So that's kind of the idea. That's going to take a bit longer to get to something like Incus OS with a immutable base image and all that stuff. But I probably later this year, it would be great to get to that point. It's mostly going to depend on my own schedule, and also like other people contributing time to that. So that's kind of the 2 things. I think like over the next few weeks, I hope to have Incus deploy in a good state that people can consume and deploy their own clusters easily through it. The good thing with it being like Ansible Terraform based, that it's very easy for people to actually understand all of the components. So it's not gonna be all magic and it all just happens. You can actually go and understand what's going on behind the scenes. So I'm looking forward to that. And then later down the line, something as like an immutable base OS thing would be really attractive. It also is quite interesting from a security standpoint. All right, so next up. So is there a roadmap towards 1.0? So there won't be a 1.0. That's kind of the main thing with the roadmap. Going straight from 0.7, I guess at that point, straight to 6.0. There's not that much really for the first LTS. As I said, like, I mean, Incus today is perfectly stable. There's no concern there. For the LTS, I want to have the clustered LVM support in, and I want to have Oven interconnect in. That's the main 2 pieces. There are a few more bits here and there that could be interesting. Actually, let me just do that off screen so I don't leak anything. I was gonna show the roadmap slide from FOSDEM. I just don't want my Google Drive to go fully public on screen either. There you go. So that was the slide deck I used at FOSDEM, and there was actually a what's next thing. So yeah, on there, planned major features is also like a Bcache FS storage driver. That's something that would be interesting to do, as well as OCI support. That's also be quite interesting. Those two I don't see happening by the end of March. They're just way too big, and I don't have the time. But distributed LVM and cross-cluster networking through Oven, those two I definitely expect to be there, as well as potentially a few other cluster-related bits that would make everyone's life a bit easier. As a reminder, like our LTSs, they are primarily bug fixes, but we also backport small quality of life improvements. So small tweaks to the CLI, the occasional small feature here and there. The main thing is an LTS release cannot get an update that changes the database, because if we do, then we don't have a good upgrade path and everything falls apart. So large features are not suitable to backport to an LTS, but smaller ones, smaller tweaks, extra config keys, that kind of stuff, that we can do. So I still expect that 6.01, 6.02, 6.03, so the LTS bug fix releases will get some minor improvements as part of that. So that's for the roadmap side of things. Let me check other questions. Okay, so there's a question around kind of going from a Proxmox V type setup over to Incus. Yeah, so and also like kind of where does Incus fit in? So maybe to answer that part first, like Incus is a bit different from a Proxmox or VMware right now because it's not its own operating system. It doesn't have an image, you just blot onto a disk, boot, and there you go. It's really something you install on top of a normal Linux distribution. So it's great for you to use it on, say, your laptop. You can just install it there and it works great. But you can also run it on your home lab servers and the like by installing a base distro, whether it's Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, whatever, and then install Incus on top of that. So that works pretty well, but it also means that it's like a bunch of the lower level stuff is effectively left to the OS to figure out. Like your like actually getting your low level networking set up, whether it's like doing LECP bonds, doing bridging, that kind of stuff. You want to get that set up through your OS. And similarly, on the storage side, you might also want to set up your physical storage pools and that kind of stuff at the OS level, and then consume that from Incus. There's a question specifically around the shared storage thing. So it kind of depends. Storage is a bit weird. Inside of a cluster, you can use local storage, which means that if you move an instance from one machine to another, its storage will also be transferred. It's going to take a bit longer. You can use something that's potentially a bit overkill for many, which would be using Ceph as a distributed storage layer, at which point, hey, your storage is all nice and shared and replicated, so you can actually full-on lose machines, and it's perfectly fine. But you're mentioning something around shared storage, which is potentially what people are used to if they come from the VMware world, potentially Proxmox too, where you might have like a dedicated SAN or NAS or something providing you with some kind of block storage over iSCSI, Fiber Channel, and VME over TCP or something along those lines, and then want to use that shared storage across multiple machines on your cluster and use that as your clustered storage. That's currently not possible, but that's what I'm currently working on with the clustered LVM. So let me see if I can just show you that. So LVM01. Okay, my bash history is not long enough. So I'm connecting here to some instances running on my laptop from my desktop machine. So I've got 3 of those. It's a cluster of 3 as I usually do, since that's the minimum size for like full-on HA. So if I need to test fault recovery and that kind of stuff, I need to have 3 anyways. Okay, so in this case, I do have a cluster, again, of 3 machines. And those use LVM for storage, but a bit of a special LVM. It uses something called LVM lockd, which combined with another piece of software called SANlock, lets you do a shared block across multiple systems and then put LVM on top of that. So that's actually what I have. I've got here an NVMe, you can see it, NVMe 0N1 drive, and if we go look, I guess by, well, by UUID, I guess. No. By part UUID. No. By ID. I'm trying to just find an identifier for that disk. There's nothing super unique. Actually, there is disk thing here. Let's see if the same identifier is shown on all of them. That would be cool. I'm not sure if it is. Address. Yeah, it is. So we can see that effectively the exact same disk is available on all three of those systems. So that's long NVMe drive here. And then what I do with that is I've got a, so there's a LVM PV on top of that drive with an LVM VG on top of it. So far, everything looks perfectly normal. The part that is not normal, and you'll see that quickly enough, is that you actually have the exact same thing on all three. And it's not that they just have the same named LV, they actually have the exact same one. So if I go here and launch, I don't know, an Alpine container, it's gonna pick one of the systems to actually go and unpack it and start it. There we go. And if we look, this one has it, this one has it, this one has it too. So that's effectively a consistent LVM across multiple systems, which Incus then treats as shared storage. So if we look at storage list, it doesn't say driver LVM, it says driver LVM cluster, which is slightly different. And so say I wanted to move that instance from LVM1 to LVM2, LVM02. This is near instance because no data needs to be moved. The instance just gets told, hey, you're actually on this one now, and there you go. So that's what I've been working. As mentioned, there's currently an issue, and that's why I've got a virtual machine running there. If you do actual live migration, there's an issue accessing the same block device from both at the same time during the migration, and that's causing VMs to fail. So I'm going to be working on that this afternoon after this live stream, and once I sort out a way to bypass that particular lock during the migration process, then that piece of work will be ready, and it will head for review upstream, and will be part of Incus 06. So that means that with Incus 06, you can actually build a local cluster backed by a shared block device, whether that's coming from like an iSCSI share or something else from a NAS you might have around, or if it's coming from something fancier like a fiber channel SAN, you'll be able to do that. Alrighty. So next up, some issues with Creo. Oh yeah, who doesn't? Yeah, so Creo is a very, very interesting piece of software. It's also a bit of a pain in the ass to get working, to be fair. And I don't I would love to do a demo right now, but I'm not aware of anything I can do to make it work right now. So to just explain how things work. Creo, it stands for checkpoint restore in user space. And it's a piece of code that lets you analyze an existing process or process tree in the case of a container and serialize all of that down to disk. So it will create a bunch of protobuf encoded files onto disk, which can then be read and recreated as actual processes. The in-user space part is kind of the biggest issue with this stuff. Since there's no native kernel support for any of that, it means that user space code needs to be able to analyze everything that those processes have, all their memory, all their open files, all their network connections, all of that stuff, encode all of that down into disk, and then recreate that. And the way you recreate it is by actually having Creo itself spawn a tiny process that then reads those memory files, unpack the protobuf data, and reload everything right in place. It's an amazing project, and it can actually be made to work. Google is known, for example, for using that to avoid doing cold start of applications. When they scale an application internally, they can do a warm start by having effectively restoring a pre-warmed cache, like a pre-warmed piece of software that already has all of the data loaded and all the stuff in memory cache. So it starts at peak performance right from the start. It's really neat, but for general purpose containers, it's quite problematic because you've got a game of cat and mouse type thing where Linux keeps adding new features, user space keeps using those new features. Creo needs to also find ways to read and serialize all of those new things and restore them. And the Creo team is just not fast enough to be able to keep up with all of the new stuff being added. And on top of that, we have a few kind of bugs we're looking at right now, which are making even the most basic cases fail right now. In general, what I would expect to see is that a container that's based on like a basic image, like Alpine or BusyBox, should be able to do a stateful stop, stateful migration, stateful restore. That should work. I did spend a bit of time actually with Alexander on the LXD team during FOSDEM looking at that. And there is currently an issue with the way LXC uses console devices, which is confusing Creo and preventing that from working. That shouldn't be a super hard fix. And it's possible that with that one fixed, the rest of Creo will work for those simpler workloads. It's also possible that this is just hiding a bunch of other issues that we'll need to work through. So no promises, but it's something that I would like to see work better. And I might be able to spend like half a day or something over the next few weeks to just kind of get us there, get us past that first hurdle that we're aware of. Alrighty. Next up, hello from Japan, a big private user of Incus. What is your opinion on Bcache Fast? Does it solve the VM issues BFS has? I don't know. So I've heard a lot of hype around Bcache, and I'm really hoping that it has a design that will provide for good file system and block handling, something similar to what ZFS provides. ZFS is really good for that from my point of view, because it provides a very good ability to use multiple underlying devices, create a pool on top of that, do all of the replication and stuff you might want, and then provide you with file systems as well as block and support snapshot, deduplication, copy and write, and all of that stuff. That's really what makes it so well suited for something like Incus. But there's obviously the concern of it being out of tree, different license, that kind of stuff, which makes it unusable for some people. I really hope that Bcachefs might be an eventual answer to that. But at the same time, when BurFS first started, it was also being pushed as an answer to the exact same problem. And we all know how that went. So I'm hopeful, but until we've actually got a initial driver written and have done some amount of testing on it, it's kind of hard to tell. There's also the fact that this is extremely new. Like Linux 6.7 is the first release with Bcachefs at all. So it's going to be very new, very early adopter type thing. I would not use that on any kind of production system at this point. But I'm definitely hopeful for what it might provide. All right. Will the switch from LXD be supported long enough to wait for the LTS? And can that also just be done with that tool? I would like to switch version, but prefer to stay until on the LTS. Yeah, so Incus LTS won't have any problem moving you from LXD 5.0 LTS. We can't speak to what Canonical will do with LXD 6.0, so that's kind of the concern. If you are currently on LXD LTS, then because that's usually tracked on the full release and you won't be automatically moved from 5.0 to 6.0, you should be fine. Like 5.0 to Incus is going to be no problem whatsoever. I would just recommend that people don't jump onto LXD 6.0 once it releases, because that one might be a problem. We don't know yet, and the problem is that the Incus LTS might release before the LXD LTS, so we might need to do a point release on our side to try and line things up. It's basically the same kind of concern as we have when you try to move from non-LTS to LTS even within Incus, where if there are database changes, we're going to have problems. And currently, Incus has done a number of database schema changes compared to LXD, but LXD has not done any of those, any changes of their own. So far we have added stuff, we don't have any diverging stuff, which makes it very easy for the migration tool to handle. As soon as we get into a world where LXD has done schema changes that don't line up with ours, that's when problems are going to start to happen. We can still handle that. It's possible for the migration tool to detect whether you've actually made use of whatever that new schema feature is, and if not, revert the schema change, revert the schema version, and then proceed with the upgrade. There's a bunch of stuff we can do, but yeah, currently if you're on 5.0 LTS of LexD, there won't be any problem with you moving to Incus 6.0. That's perfectly fine. We test that one every day. Just maybe try to avoid going to LexD 6.0 before moving to Incus, because that's where things could get tricky. All right, just looking through the rest of the chat. Good base, 2 base on Debian. Yeah, so Debian and their kernel specifically was the question. So yeah, using a Debian base is perfectly fine. If you're using Bookworm, I think the kernel is not all that old, to be fair. But if you do want newer kernels, you can do, so actually provide a bunch of different repos. Under my company's GitHub account, I provide not only the Incus repo that you've probably seen if you've been looking at the package for Ubuntu or Debian, but also provide kernel builds, which would get you also on Debian a 6.7.4 kernel right now, which is effectively the latest upstream. And if you need that and need to have ZFS work on top of it, I also have a separate repo that provides you with packages for ZFS 2.2 on top of that latest kernel build. So it's effectively what I use here, where I've got Debian, like Debian base OS, that's fine, I like it. But then I've got my kernel on top, which gets me 6.7.4, and I've got my ZFS packages on top, which gets me CFS 2.2. And that works great in my experience. So that's definitely an option if you need to have a more recent kernel. All right. Yeah. Okay. So those were just chats within the chat. That's fine. Does Incus work with just QEMU guest agent for VMs, or need a special guest agent in VM? So you can run the Incus VMs without any agent. That works perfectly fine. There's no issue there. But if you want, so the special source of Incus effectively, right, is just like I did here. This is me entering a VM. It behaves as if it's a container. And the way that stuff works, so the way we do execution of commands and file transfers through the Incus API directly into a VM, that's done through the Incus agent that runs inside of the VM. If that's not running, then you won't be able to do exec, you won't be able to do file transfers. You're gonna need to get like a full-on Visual Console, which you can, or either text console or Visual Console, so you can do text console that way, or you can do full-on graphical console that way, which then lets you interact with the VM. And through that, you can then get SSH or something like that working and then manage it like any other systems. Personally, I quite like having the agent because I don't need to run SSH, I don't need to mess with local accounts or that kind of stuff. I can just get in there immediately, which is really convenient. But if you need like more of a normal workflow, that's perfectly fine too. Okay. Is there a working UI manageable Incus cluster? Yeah, there is. So again, I mean, there's no official UI really, but as part of the packages that I put out, and I think a bunch of Linux distros have kind of followed suit as well, I provide an extra package called Incus UI Canonical, which actually takes the LexD web interface and just runs it on top of Incus. Let me see if that works for my home cluster right now. So I think it would be cluster.shf here. Let's see, login with SSO. And it will then start going through. So in my case, this is my production cluster for home. And as you can see, I'm actually using the OIDC, so OpenID Connect authentication system. So that's why instead of using a certificate, it's sending me over to log in through Keycloak. And now I'm on my home cluster. We can see here it's got 3 machines. All 3 machines are running. I've got multiple projects up here. So I can go look at, say, like a demo project. It shows me the instances running on there. I can look at like core containers and all of that kind of stuff. Actually, if I go look at my demo project, I've got a VM here, which is a bit of a weird one. I'm actually running a full VMware ESX stack inside of an Incus VM, mostly for testing some stuff. But if you're dealing with those kind of VMs, you can actually get access to the VGA console. So in here, you can see VMware ESXi running and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there is a UI that is functional enough. It doesn't get you every single piece of feature that's supported on Incus, but it gets you a decent overview at least. And yeah, that's the Incus. That's the actually the UI developed by Canonical for LXD, which we just take, rebrand, ship basically, with a couple of small changes to deal with our image server and that kind of stuff. All right. Let me figure out where I was. Because that was the UI. Any plans on forking PyLXD as PyIncus? No. I mean, I would love for someone to do it, but I'm not a good enough Python developer these days to try and tackle that kind of stuff. If someone wants to do the work and wants to maintain a good quality API client for Incus in Python, I would love to work with them. I would love to have it actually hosted on the LXC project alongside our other repos. That'd be great. I just would not recommend forking PyLXD, to be honest. PyLXD's design is quite clunky and weird. It's just not very pleasant to use, not very modern. So I would strongly recommend anyone really wanting to drive Incus from Python probably design something from scratch and like tries to, I don't know, line up with maybe the design of what we've done in Go or line it up better with the design of the API in itself or something or not, and kind of go with like a modern Python 3 code base. The PyLXD is designed with had a bunch of constraints when it was designed because it had to be used within OpenStack, which was still a Python 2 code base at the time. So it doesn't get to use anything super modern, has to use a bunch of other packages to handle async and a bunch of other things. So I would not recommend forking it. I expect that it actually works pretty well against Incus on its own right now. If not, I'm sure there's a few small patches that could be sent to make it work better as it is. But if you want to like full on start forking it and going it by Incus and all that kind of stuff, I would strongly recommend just redesigning this thing from scratch as something more modern. Right. Bookworm is 6.1. Yeah. Yeah, 6.1 is not bad. I mean, I think Debian tries to stick to kernel LTSs. So Bookworm would be on 6.1, which was what, last year's LTS, I guess. Current LTS is what, 6.6, I think is the current LTS. So it's not too bad. And they probably also have some backported kernels you might be able to use. But again, if you want effectively the latest upstream kernel updated every week, then that's something I do offer through my Linux repo, so you can just use that. Does Incus support mixed x86 in ARM64 environment? Well, yes, it does. I'm not sure if you caught that because it was pretty quick in the UI. But actually, if we go look at the cluster again. So first server is an AMD EPYC, second server is an Intel Xeon, third server is something you probably have never seen before because pretty much nobody ever got one of those, is a Qualcomm Centric, which is a 45-core ARM64 server. And you can see it here, architecture, failure domain, it shows x86, x86, AR64. And if you go look at that demo project I had up, it's not actually visible in the UI, which is a bit unfortunate. But this container is x86. This VM is x86. This VM is not. This VM is AR64. So that's ARM64. And that works the exact same. So if I start it up, it's going to boot up, get me an agent and all that kind of stuff. So it works perfectly fine on Intel 64-bit and ARM 64-bit. But it also works on PowerPC 64-bit, IBM mainframes, if you've got any of those in your basement, and RISC-V 64 and a few other architectures here and there. So we've got pretty good support, and we can indeed mix and match within a cluster just fine. Yes, AR64 is the same as ARM64. It's just a naming thing where the names we use within Incus are the kernel names. So in the Linux kernel, Intel 64-bit is called x86_64. ARM 64-bit is called AR64, etc., etc. They've got slightly different namings between what Linux distributions like Debian might call things compared to what the Linux kernel calls things. So there are just a few differences there. Okay, so there's then the question for like, does it do like cross emulation effectively? So the case where you want to run ARM64 on an Intel machine, or you want to to do the opposite with like Intel on ARM64? And the answer to that is no. For virtual machines, at least, we only act as a type 1 hypervisor. So we use KVM for full hardware accelerated emulation. We don't do CPU emulation. So we don't do ARM64 on Intel or Intel on ARM64. It wouldn't be difficult to do it. QEMU does it with an obvious performance penalty that can be really annoying. But so far, that's kind of made the whole story a bit too confusing, and also gets pretty tricky as far as like all of the potential agent binaries we need, drivers, firmwares, all that kind of stuff, because the support matrix then becomes kind of crazy. So currently we've not been doing that. We only run on native architectures. But since you can mix and match within a cluster, that works pretty well. You can have, your home lab on a bunch of like mini PCs or Intel NUCs or something, and then plug in a couple of Raspberry Pis, and then you get ARM that way. It's pretty nice and easy to mix that way. All right. Just reading the chat real quick. Is it possible to lock root user from any container or VM with shell commands? Incus. No. So I mean, I don't know exactly what that means. So we could effectively, if you've got Incus, you can run commands inside a container, and that goes straight to root. You can specify you want a different user. You can't really prevent running stuff as root, but also because our containers are unprivileged by default, there's none of that kind of security concern around running something as root inside of it. So that's kind of the way that stuff is. There's also similar concerns with VMs of like, oh, but like if you're on the agent, then anyone on the host system can just get root in the VM, and that's true, but that was already true to begin with. If you've got root on the host system or root equivalent on the host system, you can get root in any container on this machine. You can get root in any virtual machine on this machine. Like, it takes a bit of effort for VMs. You need to go mess with memory and stuff, but you can still do it. So that doesn't really make things any worse security-wise. What you can do now with Incus is we support OpenFGA, which is the Open Fine-Grained Access Control System, which then lets you give different level of permissions to different people, to different projects, or different set of instances. And part of those permissions are things like read-only, where you can only look at the current running state. Like, okay, it's running, it's got this IP address, it's got this config, but it won't let you run a command inside it, because that would be more than what your privileges allow. So that's that's kind of the option there for giving different level of people different access. And so in an environment, say if you're like full infrastructure as code, and you do deployment entirely through Terraform and Ansible and everything, and you don't want people to go and mess around directly through the API and run commands and the like, you can totally give a authentication token that has full access to your deployment system, but then only give read-only access to everyone else, so they get to see what's running, but they don't get to actually get a shell into anything. So that's maybe the way you do it in those kind of more restricted environments. Is the UI itself tied to a particular cluster? Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting. So the UI itself is completely stateless. The UI itself is just a few JavaScript files. All it does is talk through the REST API the exact same way a command line tool or the exact same way Ansible or Terraform or anything else does. It doesn't have its own authentication system. It doesn't have configuration, doesn't have any of that kind of stuff that it stores itself. It's literally accessing some static files on a web server and then talking to the API. We should actually be able to see that if we go into, say, developer mode and network, and then go to, I don't know, the instance list. Yeah, so instance list, we'll see it's poked /projects, 1.0 instances, and waiting for operations. If we open, say, the OpenShift VM, then it queries OpenShift, gets some metrics. So it does the exact same operations as the command line tool would do. If you were using the command line tool and passing --debug, you would get the exact same thing. So that's what I really like, is that there is no special case. Incus offers a REST API. All of our tools, whether they're first party, third party, or whatever, they all use the exact same APIs and work the exact same way. So there's no special source, no special hidden thing that some tools get to use and some don't. Alrighty. Okay. Yeah, so there's a question like around the kernel for like Incus OS or something. Most likely, if I was to build Incus OS today, I would use a Debian 12 base, but use my kernel, so like the 674 kernel, and my Incus package on top. That's kind of the idea, and that's probably how we would do it. So there would be a very recent kernel. And that's not because we've got any issue with the Debian kernel, far from it. It's simply that myself and some of my friends, we have quite a bit of experience doing kernel development and kernel debugging, and it's a lot easier for us to track down a bug and get it fixed if it's running a very recent mainline kernel instead of a distro kernel with a whole bunch of patches applied on top. So that's most likely what we would be doing on that front. Alrighty, so insert that one, insert that one. VM's working on AR64 with KVM. Yeah. No, ARM64 supports accelerated virtualization, no problem. You can run that even on development boards. So if you're using like a Raspberry Pi 4, Raspberry Pi 5, you can do fully CPU accelerated virtualization on there, no problem. It's actually being used now, I think, by Android on some of the more recent phones where they actually run some stuff on your phone inside virtual machines. So yeah, ARM's been doing fully accelerated virtualization for a while. There are some limits, like on Intel, I can do, on Intel or on AMD, I can do nested virtualization, which is what I was doing with that ESXi thing I was showing earlier. Like it's ESXi running in a VM on top of Incus, which then itself runs virtual machines. So I can do that on Intel. I can't do that on ARM because most ARM platforms don't support nested virtualization. But for the rest, yeah, ARM works just fine, including things like GPU pass-through, PCI pass-through, all that kind of stuff. It's all fine. What's my favorite storage system? So my usual go-to for like storage is the thing I tend to say is that they all suck. They just suck in different ways, and you've got to pick which one is the most compatible with what you might want to do. For me, that tends to mean local storage is ZFS because that gets me high performance replication, like file system for data sets for file systems, volumes for block. It's great. It can be a bit resource intensive, so I probably would not be super happy running that on like a 2 gigs memory Raspberry Pi, but also don't run Incus on those kind of systems to begin with, so it's not a problem. It's great because it does also all of the kind of accelerated migration logic to like move just as many bytes are actually needed to replicate things across systems. It's great. If I need shared storage, so like my production clusters, like I've got in data center or even part of the cluster I've got at home, because I need everything to be fully replicated, fully HA, so a machine can die and everything keeps working. Those machines will use Ceph. But I usually use kind of a mix of the two, actually. Let's see, for my home one, should be able to see that here, hopefully. I believe at home I'm running with 3 storage pools. We'll probably see that in a few seconds. I've got a lot of volume, so it takes a while to load. There we go. So I'm running with 2 Ceph storage pools. I've got one that's backed by SSDs. So that means this one is actually backed primarily. Well, initial write goes to an NVMe, secondary writes go to SATA SSDs. So it's pretty quick. There's still a bunch of latency because Ceph is not good for latency, but throughput is good. Then I've got a hard disk pool as well, which is used for the very large volumes I need. So that's things like surveillance footage, which takes like 5 or 6 terabytes on its own, backups, that kind of stuff. So that's on hard disks only. I don't think I even have an SSD cache in front of me, it's just hard disks. And then for local instances, so for those that I don't care if the machine straight up dies and I lose those instances, those go into a local storage pool. And that's primarily used for things like the Try It online demo. If you use Try It, you're going actually on this very cluster. So if I go down, Can see try it, and we've got like a whack ton of instances on this stuff. There we go. Actually need to do some cleanup apparently, but so all of the instances run on there, and then they have they're stored on local storage because I don't care about them being replicated. They just need to be fast. So that's for that. Let me check. Is it possible to natively access Incus VM desktop environment in a browser like Apache Guacamole does? Yeah, it is. So I don't think I've got anything desktop-y in this particular cluster, but if I reconnect to my home, so if I go on that's my actual desktop machine here, it's okay, it needs login with SSO, and here we go again. Okay, I need to get a two-factor authentication code. Okay. So that's on my desktop, and one of those here is Windows 11. So if I do Windows 11 console, and there we go. So that works perfectly fine. You can like full screen the thing as well, and yeah, you get it working directly through the web UI that way. So yeah, you don't need to install anything. If you're using it from the command line, you can do the exact same thing by doing incus console win11 VGA, and that's gonna get you the same thing. There you go. So that works fine out of the box. You don't need to install anything for that. The only reason why you might want to use, like in the case of Windows, maybe use RDP or something else to get better performance than you would get out of the basic GPU driver that we use. Right. Is there any new talk on porting the agent to FreeBSD? No, I haven't heard anything recently. It's not something I care too much to do myself. But with the work I've done in Incus 05 to support multiple agent builds, if someone is to actually do that work and make it properly cross-compiled to BSD, then it will be very easy to actually have that shipped in every distro and just have it work seamlessly on BSD. So it would be really cool. And if someone was to do that, then I would be quite happy to also sort out how to publish pre-installed BSD images on the image server. So you can just launch FreeBSD or some of the other BSD flavors directly without needing to go through the install process. That would be pretty cool. All right. Let's see. So yeah, question around the Google project documentation. So that's the Google season of docs stuff. Possibly. It's one of those things where I would love to, but I also don't have sufficiently well-defined goals on the documentation to really submit a full case right now. And there's a bunch of paperwork that will be needed to actually properly register. Like, I don't want to just register as myself and get the money through my company and stuff. That feels wrong. I would rather have Incus be registered as its own organization, but then we don't have a current legal entity, so we need to go and set that one up, which means also working with the other owners and maintainers of the Linux Containers project, making sure everyone is on board and that everyone is happy to go through any specific intermediary to get that set up, and then actually engaging with Google and doing all of that paperwork. So I don't know. As it stands, I'm too busy to do it. It could be that things quiet down enough that I get to get some of that stuff sorted, and we can still figure out some goals and get someone on board. That would be cool. I mean, I'm all for getting money out of Google and onto people who want to contribute to the project. That'd be great. But it's a different setup with a different set of goals, criterias, and paperwork needed than something even like the Google Summer of Code, which in general has been a bit looser as far as like requirements and how to engage with them. So we'll see. I'm not super optimistic, but it's also not impossible that we will get to do it this year. If not this year, then we should be in a much better place next year to do it. So that would be good. A few more questions. Let's see. Documentation work that is needed for Incus. Yeah, so that's kind of the thing, right? I'm sure there's, and that's from Simos. So I'm sure there are things to do. The question is like whether we can articulate that into a sufficiently big chunk that's needed, that we can justify. Like, I think there's a lot of stuff to kind of like one of the things that we started doing with Lexly, I don't know if they've gone any further because I haven't looked, is to move a bunch of the code to a bunch of the documentation to be generated from the code, so that things like the configuration keys and all that kind of stuff are generated directly from the code and included into the docs. That would be nice to complete. That could be a project. The question is that this ends up being closer to coding / development stuff because half of it is within the source code and only the other half is kind of in the documentation itself. So it may not qualify. Other than that, the rest is effectively like general consistency and stuff. Like we do need more people to really go through the documentation as a first user and notice like anything that's missing, any kind of, okay, well, the concepts there are not currently explained. I mean, to write that stuff. And that's kind of the other issue, I think, with some of that work is it like mentoring someone to do that, to actually do that writing and produce like a good quality documentation is likely to come at pretty significant load on myself or the developers to actually answer all the questions, answer all the concepts, and kind of provide that base feedback, which also ends up taking a bunch of time, which currently I don't have. So that's why, like, as great as it would be to use that money, as it stands, I'm not confident that it will actually be used properly, and given the criteria and the multiple stages and stuff they have, that might mean we have someone starting to do some work and only get like the first payment, and then we never qualify for the second one, and then that person doesn't get paid, which would be really bad. So that's why I'm not spending too much time trying to get that up and running right now. All right. So other topics. Incus VM support. Support Windows, the special way that OS should be set up, special drivers, or just Vertio stuff. Vertio stuff works well for Windows. You can. I mean, one thing that's been a bit of a pain in the ass with Vertio in the past has been storage, which is why we also support NVMe. So if you've got any kind of issues installing, just switch the IO.bus on the root device to NVMe and try again. For Windows, that means you get native support. You don't need to inject any driver to then go through the install, and you can install the rest afterwards to get network and all that kind of stuff going. So that was a pretty nice improvement when that was added. Does Incus support exporting metrics? Yes, it does. We do have a metrics API, and that gets fed to Prometheus. On the metrics side, we also support streaming logs to Loki. So if I go into this guy, okay, so I've got where is it? Dashboard. We've got the Incus dashboard, which is the one that's published in the Grafana store. Then you can switch to whatever cluster you want. So say we switch to the one I've got at home. There you go. And then we wanted to look at the demo project we were looking at earlier. And there you go. So it shows you like your top consumers for resources, gets you all of the CPU, memory, processes, all that stuff. And it also gets you the logs through Loki. So log entries and also all of the actions that are being performed against the cluster. So yeah, we've got all of that already kind of covered with open metrics and Loki effectively within Incus. Strange question. When importing rootfs or QCAP2, always need to generate metadata.yaml. Any consideration or feature to import without that? So metadata YAML is used. It's used to provide an image. So it provides the architecture when it was created and that kind of stuff for an image. You may not need an image. If you're just importing an existing container and existing VM, we actually have another tool called Incus Migrate that does that for you. So if we look at documentation, I believe it's under instances most likely. It's under Migrate somewhere. Huh? Is it in here? It might be in client, maybe, or general. At some point, I'll actually remember the sections in there. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm just gonna search for it. So if we look for migrate, there we go. How to migrate containers. Oh, so it was the instances, I just didn't see it at the bottom. Migration, there we go. So we have a tool called Incus migrate that you can then feed a disk device or a file system, and it will import that over the API as a new instance. And that doesn't need any kind of metadata or anything. It just imports it directly as an instance. And that's how you would go ahead. That's how you would move from, say, a VMware or Proxmox or something. You'd probably use that tool to then stream things directly over to Incus without having to jump through an image. Like, yeah, that's an example here for a container. So for a container, you give it where the file system is. You can give it some config for like number of CPUs and stuff. And then once you're done, it just transfers it. And for the VM, you do the same thing with a raw, either a raw.img file or an actual block device. And it just, again, streams it and creates that way. There's a question around metrics not integrated in the UI. So yeah, that's true. I think the UI has kind of basic stuff, which just shows you the usage, and it does use the metrics endpoint for some of that. But the UI doesn't have historical data, effectively. The UI is just talking to our API. Incus never stores long time state. That's one of our design characteristics. We only store current configuration, but we don't store any kind of long-term data. So the UI can't pull that from Incus itself. And it gets pretty tricky if you want to access an external Prometheus API directly from a piece of JavaScript coming from a different site. There's a whole bunch of concerns about like cross-site scripting and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't have that directly in it. I think what would make sense is to actually have a way to configure what the endpoints are for things like Grafana, and then have the UI just link you to it. If we know where Grafana is and what the dashboard ID is, then we could actually link directly to the right stuff in the dashboard. So that could make sense. I'm not saying we're going to be doing any improvements to the UI because the UI is currently just a rebranded version of the LXD UI. The LXD UI is under Apache and has a CLA on it. So while we can do some patches on our side as part of the build process, that becomes very annoying to maintain. And we're not going to be contributing to it directly because I'm not signing the canonical CLA. So someone could do it and contribute that to them, could report it as a wish list on the LXD side and see if they do it, at which point we will get it automatically that way. Or I think at some point down the line, we will probably switch to another UI. The LXD UI is nice and convenient because it exists, it works, it's got pretty good coverage, so we just use it right now. But it's a bit of a dead end as far as our ability to make it really fit our needs. All right, been going for already an hour, so it's probably about time to wrap things up. It was really good to see all of you. Really happy with all of the questions that I got. That was great. Far more people live on stream than I think we've ever had, so that's been great too. Definitely looking forward to Incus 06 releasing later this week and see the adoption around that. And then, you know, we're just like a month and a half away pretty much from the first Incus LTS. So that's going to be a pretty big deal. It's going to be great to see, and it's going to probably be another good opportunity for a lot of people to jump over from LXD over to Incus. Thanks a lot for the questions, really, whether it was live or sent ahead of time. Hopefully I got to answer a bunch of your questions around Incus. If you've got anything else, you can always leave them down in the comment section below, or you can go on our community forum and ask questions there. And yeah, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.